How to listen when you want to solve. G'day, it's Oscar. First off, thanks to David, to Mark, to Rain, to Wallace, and Christopher for your comments and your questions. David, it was great to speak to you on the phone, and I hope that my referral to Joey helps you progress your question around the auditory processing issues that you encounter and how that shows up really differently in one-on-one conversations and how it shows up in group discussions for you when you move from tuned in to really fuzzy auditory processing in groups. I think your point that you made in your question places a great deal of responsibility on each of us when it comes to listening. Listening is a simultaneous equation between the speaker and the listener. And I think when auditory processing issues are present, I think we need to make the implicit explicit. What do I mean by that? Communicate about what effective communication means for you. One of my past managers, Tony, he role modeled this really, really well. See, he had an issue with his left ear, and he would explain his hearing difficulty to every group meeting he would participate in when he knew somebody new was in the meeting. Now, I discussed this with Tony on a long haul flight across the Pacific, and he didn't enjoy repeating it, but he said to me, it's better than creating the impression that you're ignoring people. And I've seen this myself working with an executive team, and people were saying that the leader in the room, well, she's ignoring us, Oscar. She's always looking down at the ground when we're speaking. In that moment, I invited the leader to explain. She said to the group, I concentrate much better on what you're saying when I'm not visually distracted. I'm not ignoring you. I'm focusing all my efforts on making sure I'm hearing everything that you're saying. And in that moment, you could hear a very audible sigh in the room from every participant. It was a breakthrough moment. And a breakthrough moment happens if you communicate about how you communicate. Sometimes we overread body language, and this is a perfect example of not asking that question. Thanks to Rain, who commented with her question, how can we encourage people to listen instead of concentrating on their comeback? It's a great question, one I'm going to do a pretty deep dive on. But Rain, as a tip for you, again, remember listening's a simultaneous equation. We can give great listening, and that becomes an example. When you do it consistently, you'll be providing them an example of what it sounds like to pause in the moment, to ask an extra question in the moment, rather than reloading your argument. Now, in response to Rain's question, Wallace said we did an exercise that required any response from a conversation to summarize back what you heard. And Wallace points out often misunderstandings were caught straight away before the conversation went off the rails. This reinforces listen to understand rather than to respond. Rain, I promise you a full deconstruction of how I'd approach a conversation where everybody's busy reloading their arguments rather than listening. Thanks, Wallace. A really great practical example of the use of paraphrasing in your response. Christopher asked as well, he said, how many layers, Oscar, can a person listen to and simultaneously sustain? Listening is a strategy and it's a practice, but it's also about very small progress. This is a great question that I'm going to delayer in response to your question, but possibly remember this, that each level in any kind of listening is foundational. and you need to build on top of it. Here's a completely different perspective. Here's my hint for you, Christopher, and I'm going to give you a full explanation of this in another video. But rather than thinking, how many layers can I simultaneously sustain? Ask yourself this question. Which layer of listening is going to be most effective in this moment for me, for them, and for the outcome we're trying to engage with? For me, when I notice this and ask myself the question, what layer or level should I be listening at? It makes listening really light and easy to sustain, and my listening batteries aren't drained by the intensity of juggling multiple layers in the conversation. And now for today's listening question. This question comes from Kerry. She asked, Oscar, what I struggle with in my listening is listening to the whole problem or the whole conversation, because all I'm thinking about is how do I solve it? And I think this is a problem. Also, I don't help the speaker solve their own problems, and this creates extra effort for me. Normally, I jump in and give an answer, which Kerry says exactly doesn't help me or them. So, Kerry, here's my invitation for you and a couple of suggestions. Number one, ask this question at the beginning of the conversation. This will take the weight off your superhero solving capacity. You don't have to worry about that. Ask this question. The question is, what would make this a great conversation for you? Or what outcome would you like to achieve at the end of our conversation? Now, they might not want a solution. They might just want a thinking partner. They might just want to express an idea. Extroverts love to think by speaking. We don't give them the opportunity to do that. Allow them to express their thinking verbally rather than jumping in to try and fix the issue. When you agree the outcome of the conversation, use that as a navigational setting, like a compass setting, and that'll help you progress and check in and ask yourself this question, Kerry. Given that compass setting, rather than solving the problem, ask yourself this question: does what I'm about to ask them next progress the agreed outcome of the conversation? It helps to drive alignment all the way along. When you get that really solving, bursting approach in your conversation, just pause and ask yourself, thinking about the purpose we agreed at the beginning, is this aligned? Question number two is often skipped, often ignored, and you do so at your peril. Question number one is, what will make this a great outcome for you? And question number two is, ask them, what have you already explored or thought about in regard to this issue, matter, problem? Now, you might be shocked. They may have come up with many alternatives that you haven't even considered because you're hearing it for the first time. Your role here is to help them expose all the thinking that they've done, and you may help them to consider, how do I prioritize this approach? Or maybe between the two of you or in a group, you can combine elements of different parts of the solution. Or something may simply emerge through the process of having a conversation. Number three, are you solving a symptom? Or are you addressing a cause? Is what you're about to propose transactional or transformational? And which one of those two serves the agreed purpose of the conversation? If you come back and always check in with, is this serving the agreed purpose of the conversation, then you'll make great progress. For you, Kerry, listening will become lighter. Your problem-solving passion, it won't go away, but you will bring different approaches that they possibly haven't considered. Now, I'm curious if you've taken the deep listening quiz, Kerry, because if you have, the problem solving is a really common barrier of the shrewd listening villain. If you want to take the quiz, visit listeningquiz.com and you can answer 20 questions in under 7 minutes, which will get you the answers to what are your most common listening barriers. A big thank you to Nikki, to Babu, to Mark, to Natasha, to Francesco, to Paral, to Tracy, and to Robert for your encouragement. If you, like Kerry, have got a question about listening in the workplace, just put it in an email, podcast@oscartrimboli.com. That's podcast@oscartrimboli.com. I'm Oscar Trimboli, and along with the deep listening ambassadors, we're on a quest to create 100 million deep listeners in the world. And you've given us the greatest gift of all. You've listened to us. Just put it in an email, podcast@oscartrimboli.com. That's podcast@oscartrimboli.com. I'm Oscar Trimboli, and along with the deep listening ambassadors, we're on a quest to create 100 million deep listeners in the world. And you've given us the greatest gift of all. You've listened to us. Thanks for listening.